Chapter 1054. Smoke curled up under the eaves. It was like looking at flowers in the fog. Fan Junmaro asked, "Do you know which Saint Abbot accompanied him to the ceremony of Zitong Mountain?" Chen Pinggan shook his head. "It's hard to say. For the time being, only Mount Biyun and Mount Zitong are confirmed. They are Mr. First and Zhu State respectively. There are more swordsmen in the territory of the old Zhuiying dynasty." Fan Junmaro said, "If you have the chance, have a drink with Fan and persuade him. He's not young anymore, but he's still single. It's ridiculous. Is it so interesting to make money? He's not idle at all throughout the year. If he's free, he'll hang out with the accountant and the craftsman. What's his purpose? He's always playing with the abacus and looking at the account book." Chen Pinggan smiled. "Some people are born to simply like making money. It's very pure. It's similar to martial arts learning boxing and swordsmen practicing swords. They enjoy themselves." Fan Shanjun, "Don't worry. I'll definitely take the initiative to have a drink with Fan Chapter 1055. Chen Pinggan asked curiously, "Are you really going to hold 2-night banquets in a row?" Even the slender eyebrow river god Gao Ju, who was not short of money, had to tell the truth after drinking at the village school last time. Today was a night banquet followed by a day's rest to take a breather. When everyone finally managed to save some money, they would have to hold another banquet the day after tomorrow. Money did not fall from the sky. It was really unbearable. Wei Pai glanced at him. Chen Pinggan said tactfully, "Pretend I didn't ask." Wei Pai said, "I have an appointment with Meng Rong to drink at the Changpu River." Chapter 1056. The sun was warm, and spring was shining. Flowers were blooming one after another. In the Liulichang of the capital, which was full of bookstores, a handsome young man with a shiny purple gourd wine flask hanging from his waist was sitting at the entrance of a store, enjoying the sun. He was eating a bowl of yellow pea cake that he had bought on the way here while bargaining with the shopkeeper he was familiar with, saying that the few books he had his eyes on were for old ladies who couldn't get married. At the same time, he was exchanging flirtatious glances with the lady boss of the bookstore next door, who had set up a roadside stall to dry books. At the same time, he was waiting here, killing 3 birds with 1 stone. The shopkeeper, who had lent a stool to the young drunkard, sat behind the counter and carefully wiped a piece of fake official porcelain. He raised his head and looked at the scoundrel outside the door, who was sending amorous glances to the shopkeeper beside him. He chuckled and said, "Assistant Minister Cao, if you dare to touch her hand and hug her a few times in broad daylight, I will sell all the books in my shop to you at a 50% discount. How about it?" The young man picked up a piece of yellow pea cake and threw it into his mouth, then said with a grin, "I don't want to do it in broad daylight. Can I do it at night?" Eavesdropping? The 2 men in front of the shop were talking loudly. Obviously, they didn't try to avoid the middle-aged woman. Hearing the young man, the woman grabbed a book from the stall and threw it at the handsome young man, who was always fooling around. "One of you is a coward, and the other is a coward. Both of you only know how to flirt. What's the point?" Chapter 1057. Cao Gengxin arrived at a residence in a secluded and shabby alley in the capital. He fished out a key and opened the door to a small courtyard. The ground was covered in dust and fallen leaves, and a rotten smell assaulted his senses. A residence that had been uninhabited for a long time indeed aged faster. This was the first time Cao Gengxin had stepped into the courtyard. The previous few times, he had not entered because someone had instructed Supervisor Cao in a secret letter that when the successor to the Dali Imperial Tutor was to come here to open the courtyard and hold a meeting. However, the letter did not specify what to discuss or who to call. The other party only gave Cao Gengxin a title that did not receive a salary from the Imperial Court and would not be recorded in the Imperial Court's official records. Unexpectedly, there was a small well in the courtyard. Cao Gengxin squatted at the mouth of the well and looked inside for a while. It was pitch black and did not look like there were corpses inside. It also did not look like the entrance to a dragon palace on the mainland. It was neither unlucky nor fortunate. Cao Gengxin then threw a stone in. Dong. Fortunately, it could draw water. After drawing water, Cao Gongxin went to the utility room to get a broom and dustpan and began to sweep the courtyard. The main room and the rooms on both sides were empty and destitute. After finishing this, Cao Gongxin sat by the mouth of the well. He took off the small purple gourd wine flask at his waist and pulled out the cork. He then raised his head and drank a mouthful of the evergreen wine bestowed by the imperial court. There was a spring festival couplet pasted on the door of the main room. However, as the years passed, the red paper of the couplet had long since turned white. The handwriting was like a stone tablet, scattered and indistinct. Moreover, the first half of the couplet had been lost. The writing was without spirit, echoing what others said. Chapter 1058. At the entrance of Luo Po Mountain. A burly man with a young man carrying a sword on his back and wearing a tiger head hat descended from the sky. Jun Qian smiled. "We're here." Bai Yi looked at the direction of Luo Po Mountain and nodded. "The feng shui is not bad." Jun Qian said, "The atmosphere is even better." Chapter 1059. There were promising children like Yuan Zhengding and Guan Iran in Yinkai Alley who achieved great things and brought glory to the family, but there were also those who couldn't wear the robes of an official and couldn't get a title. They were just there to make money. Today, Cao Gongxin was on his way home when he met such a hedonistic son who would burn incense if he didn't take down the family's pillar. The family wasn't very disappointed in this person. In any case, there were many descendants of officials and generals in Yinkai Alley and Ma Street. As long as they didn't get in the way of their elders during festivals and didn't get scolded, they would be able to live happily for a whole year in the first month. The carriage slowly stopped because the man heard the driver's voice reminding him that Assistant Minister Cao wasn't working at the Yamen today. The man hurriedly lifted the curtain with his white fingers. He and Cao Qinglang were the same age. Today, he had brought a vixen in luxurious clothes with him. She said she wanted to stroll around the legendary Yinkai Alley. Ordinary carriages wouldn't dare to stroll around here. Even if the law didn't prohibit it, they wouldn't have the guts to visit this alley. The man brought her here to broaden her horizons. This kind of behavior was tried and true and was more effective than an aphrodisiac. The man moved to the window and reached out to lift the curtain woven by the Tsai kingdom. He saw Assistant Minister Cao, who was walking alone with a purple gourd. He first bragged to the woman about how good his relationship with Assistant Minister Cao was and how noble Assistant Minister Cao was in the Great Li dynasty. Yinkai Alley was only open during morning court and dusk. It was full of people and was very deserted at this time. The man poked his head out of the window. Seeing that there was no one around, he shouted and laughed, "Brother Cao, when you have time, come to my family's restaurant to drink. We just bought a batch of mountain wine. In fact, the taste isn't inferior to the eternal spring immortal wine, but it's relatively less famous." Assistant Minister Cao, who was walking in the shade of a parasol tree, stopped and turned his head to look. There seemed to be a pig's head hanging on the window. Assistant Minister Cao turned sideways and waited until the carriage slowly approached. He gently tapped the pig's head with the wine gourd and teased with a smile, "Fatty Wei, are you finally willing to go home after bringing your sister-in-law home?" The fat man surnamed Wei blushed. He wasn't even married yet. Indeed, he didn't brag to that woman without thinking. He and Cao Gongxin were childhood friends who grew up together, and their relationship was very close. Chapter 1060. The white jade plate flew above the green cloud. The sky was clear and peaceful. Perhaps it was because Xiao Mo's sword light was too eye-catching and his speed was too fast that a great sword celestial must have appeared. Therefore, many cultivators rose from their respective dojos in various prefectures and wanted to come here to investigate. After all, there were only a few famous sword celestials in the green underworld. In terms of sword celestials, Xiao Mo was naturally the champion. In the Qingming world, there were often cultivators who rode the wind and rode on the wind to visit the old moon that hung in the sky with the bright colors. The white jade capital did not restrict this too much, but cultivators could not stay in the moon for too long. They had to bring the mountain utensils and delicacies to enjoy the scenery of the 14 prefectures. As a side dish, it was still okay to have a drink. The old Abbey Dean glanced at them, annoyed that they were disturbing his drinking time with Xiao Mo. He put 2 fingers together and flicked them in this direction and that direction. Bang! 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 Chapter 1061. Lunar Palace. Stork Tower by the shore, Dragon Rock by the water. Wu Shuangjiang personally received the guests and went out to welcome the master and disciples. They arrived quietly. Ascendant Realm Sword Cultivator, female ghost fairy Bao Lin, one of the 10 candidates of Qing Ming Tian. As they walked by the river, Wu Shuangjiang had already used a method to isolate the world to prevent the walls from having ears. Of course, the walls were a little thick. One side was Lunar Palace, and the other side was the Beko Keikyang building. Chapter 1062. Yuju, the ruins of a famous ancient battlefield. As far as the eye could see, it was desolate and lifeless. But in fact, the flowers and plants here were flourishing. It was just that there were no bustling cities and towering trees, which made it seem so quiet and not so lively. 2 horses were riding side by side, a man and a woman. One was riding a skinny horse, the other was an extremely handsome rouge horse. A young Taoist priest, wearing a green cotton-padded robe, shook his shoulders along with the bumpy ride of the horse. He said with a smile, "An old horse knows the way. Slow, 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 slow." Chapter 1063. Chen Pinggan brought Guozhujiu, Xiego, and Changming to Lotus Root Blessed Land. They were going to the Fox Nation, which was still sealed off from the world. Riding on the same talisman boat and passing through layers of clouds, Xiego was really bored out of his wits. He stood at the bow of the boat and shouted. Time and time again, he stretched out his palms to disperse the clouds on both sides, or to make a hole in the clouds. Xiao Mo went to the green boundless world to drink. She was not in a good mood. Chen Pinggan ordered some pastries from his shop. He opened the box and gave Guozhujiu a piece of almond pastry. Guozhujiu took it with both hands and raised it high above her head to thank her master for the gift. She swallowed it. Chen Pinggan gave her another piece of cake. Changming gave Guozhujiu a piece of peach blossom pastry and asked her to eat slowly. Changming sat beside the hill lord and smiled. The scenery of the mortal world was like a magnificent painting. Chapter 1064. Bai also followed Liu Shiliu to Luopo Mountain and did not move. Even if Wei Ba personally came to invite him, Bai was too lazy to say a word of courtesy. He looked indifferent and just shook his head. It was an obvious order to drive him away. Wei Shanjun, who was about to get the godly title Night Wandering, left immediately. He didn't dare to disturb the cultivation of the most proud person in the world. Even though Bai knew that Mr. First, the head of the 10 sages of the Confucian Temple, was on the other side of the cloud-splitting mountain, he still stayed in the mansion at the foot of the mountain. He lived in seclusion and only occasionally walked to the top of the mountain where the old mountain temple was located to enjoy the scenery. The sun rose in the East Sea and set in the West Mountain. For some reason, Bai always bumped into the strange girl in black. However, the girl, who was said to be the right guardian of Luopa Mountain, never got close to him to chat. She just stood far away with a cotton bag on her side. She greeted Zhu Mili out of courtesy. Of course, it was also because of her good friend Jun Qian. The little girl smiled and nodded vigorously. She held the green bamboo cane and the golden shoulder pole in her arms and held the string of the cotton satchel with her small hand. Bai couldn't just stare at the girl like this, so he forced a smile. Seeing that she still didn't speak, Bai continued to enjoy the burning clouds in the sky. Chapter 1065. The capital of the Nanyuan Kingdom was known as Daliang. Chen Pinggan knew the capital like the back of his hand, so he picked a restaurant with a thriving business to eat roasted fish. There was a green celery river on the outskirts of the capital, and the fish there were extremely plump and delicious. Roasted fish paired with Daliang's lotus white was a masterpiece. Because of its low price and high quality, high officials, nobles, and peddlers all liked it. However, Chen Pinggan knew immediately that it was this fish. It was the kind of fish that had been transported from other rivers to the Green Celery River for a few days of bathing. He didn't say anything, though. He glanced at the young shopkeeper. His appearance was the same as the shopkeeper of the past. Perhaps because the old shopkeeper was old, he had passed on the restaurant and his cooking skills to his son. The secret spicy oil, condiments, and side dishes of the roasted fish were all the same. The only thing missing was the taste, which was called kindness. Of course, it was also possible that the restaurant was run on a shoestring. Nowadays, the green celery river fish was already a river delicacy exclusive to the rich of Daliang. Then, the extra condiments that this little restaurant had on the side of the road was called livelihood. Earlier, it was Chen Pingan who led the way to the small restaurant. There was an empty table against the wall and 2 benches. Liu Xianyang sat down first, occupying one of the benches. He sat in the middle of the bench, slapped the table, and asked if there was any wine. Ji Yukan was standing by the table. Chen Pingan indicated for him to sit on the inside. After Ji Yukan sat down, he reached out and moved the end of the bench closer to Chen Pingan. When Chen Pingan moved and was about to sit down, Ji Yukan moved the bench back. In the past, when they sat on a ridge in the countryside, the child's head would be about the same level as the youth's shoulder. Now, they sat side by side. Chapter 1066. The blue waves were vast, and the water was cloudy. What a paradise on earth! There were more than 1,000 islands in the lake. They were scattered all over the place, and the green plates were filled with snail shells. Their ancestral mountain in the center of the lake was near the Damu Temple and the Lake Lord Temple. Not far away, there were 2 islands of different sizes. They were not far apart and looked at each other across the water. The larger Jade Hairpin Island had rows upon rows of temples and mansions. The Lake Lord Temple liked peace and did not want outsiders to climb the ancestral mountain. Chapter 1067. Within Yingchuan County, there were 3 riders riding side by side in the wind and snow. Following the map, they diverged from the relatively wide official road and turned into a small mountain road. At noon, because of the continuous heavy snow, their vision was blurred, making the already rugged mountain road even more difficult to travel. Fortunately, their mounts were not inferior horses, but fine horses from the Daoist Academy in the capital. It was said that they were descendants of the mountain dragon. Although their bloodline was thin, they could travel mountains and rivers as if they were walking on flat ground. For this trip, other than their respective official documents, the most important thing was the official document that was personally written by the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Personnel, signed by the immortal protector of the state, and then examined and approved by the largest Daoist temple in Ruzhou. The leading rider was a young woman. She wore a black veil crown and a thick and warm green Daoist robe. She had curved eyebrows and plump cheeks. Her figure was thin but well-rounded. She rode a light yellow horse. A pair of embroidered shoes were slightly exposed, lightly touching the golden stirrups. Chapter 1068. On the shore of the Autumn Chi Lake, a short man in cotton clothes and straw shoes did not like to carry a saber at his waist. He was used to carrying a scabbard. The man slightly raised his gaze and met a man in a green robe with a jade hairpin on his head. Looking at the other person's breathing speed, the weight of his footsteps, as well as his aura, he seemed to be a moderate martial artist. This was normal. Those who could enter the Autumn Chi Lake were not ordinary people. The man smiled and covered his sleeves with his hands. He asked, "You're called Wu Jiang?" Although the younger generation of Jianghu talents were not invited by Lord Gao, it was not strange that Wu Jiang appeared here. Wu Jiang nodded. Chapter 1069. Divine Cloud City's peach blossoms were as famous as the Xuanju Temple. Dong Huafu practiced his sword here, oblivious to the weather outside the city. The other 8 sword cultivators from the same hometown began to practice the dozen or so sword techniques that Divine Cloud City had made an exception to teach them. Ordinary Dao officials of Jade Pivot City, even if they were sword cultivators, could only rely on their cultivation and merit to obtain these superior sword techniques. Only Dong Huafu memorized the sword techniques silently, but did not practice these sword techniques that could not be bought with money. Apart from that, Dong Huafu was the only one among the 9 who had not received the Beko Keikyung Building's Jade Pivot City's official certificate. Regarding this, there were some discussions within Jade Pivot City, but they were all suppressed by Wang Hua. As one of the 2 deputy city lords of Divine Cloud City, Wang Hua was a middle-aged Taoist with a golden hibiscus crown. He was gentle and easy to talk to. He often came to the cottage to chat with Dong Huafu. Chapter 1070. Today, there were guests at Crow Mountain. A man and a woman. The woman was the latest grandmaster to enter the top 10 martial artists list, Jiyu Yang Ji from Yuju's Peeper Peak. Lin Jiangxian's 4 direct disciples were at the peak of the 2 peaks. The first disciple, Zhao Hechong. The person in charge of Crow Mountain now was this famous martial artist from the Peak State. The second disciple, Qi Hua Jian, was called Madam Qi by the mountain. She was a woman with a plump body and was very charming. She was also from the Peak State. Chapter 1071. Mini 4 Prefectures, Thunder Lake. On Plum Peak Island, the plum blossoms were as thin as a poem. Female Taoist Yang Qing walked among them, holding a branch of plum blossoms. The ground was filled with white clouds formed by water fate. The most mysterious thing was that these white clouds of various sizes naturally formed the shape of petals. Beside her was one of the 2 lake lords, Lei Yu. She was born in the demon race, but was able to stand firm in the mini 4 prefectures. Step by step, she became one of the 2 lake lords of the mini 4 prefectures and the female master of the vast Thunder Lake. Previously, they went to the outer space together to congratulate the talisman Yu Xian, who successfully integrated with the Milky Way. Chapter 1072. Among cultivators, some like to hide and some like to join in the fun. Liu Daochun of White Emperor City belonged to the latter. Besides, Liu Daochun himself was a lively person. After all, there were not many Qi refinement warriors who were as famous as Jiyu Qingsong in the world. He had once been personally suppressed by the Grand Heaven Master of Mount Longhu. After 1,000 years of peace and quiet, Liu Daochun had changed his name to Liu Kaicheng after coming out of seclusion. It seemed that he had improved a lot. Chapter 1073. Liu Zun walked out of the lotus root blessed land and arrived at a courtyard. The umbrella opened like a flower, hovering in the air and spinning slowly. Liu Zun appeared in the shade. At the door, a little girl in black stood straight. She turned her head slowly to the left, then to the right. She kept looking around, calling it a patrol. Beside her was a white-haired boy, who was in charge of recording the exact time when people entered and exited the blessed land. This Luopa Mountains registrar was guarding the door with the little girl. When Liu Zun arrived at Luopa Mountain, he learned that this place was called Spirit Gathering Peak. However, Jise Peak, where the Luopa Mountains Ancestral Master Hall was located, was a secondary peak, not the ancestral peak. Because the Hill Master, Head Steward Zhu Lian, and the Ancestral Master of Discipline were not on the mountain at the moment, the key to opening the door of the Blessed Land was handed over to Nuan Shu for safekeeping. A house was specially built in the mountain to store the parasol tree umbrella. In fact, other than a layer of camouflage, the house did not have any restrictions on the landscape. Chapter 1074. Surrounded by heroes, alone, he still took the initiative to invite everyone to come together. Dao and Sword were all casual. As soon as Chen Pinggan said this, the entire Damu temple felt a strong murderous aura. The white-robed young immortal of the past was now a middle-aged green-robed swordsman with a smile on his face. His tone was gentle, and there was not a bit of harshness on his face. His expression was calm, like a teacher teaching a large group of mischievous children. Later, recite more seriously, or else you will have to stand up and be beaten. Zhu Shuzhen's expression changed slightly. She only hoped to use the momentum of Jiang Quan's revenge to give Chen Pinggan a show of strength, and to make a good start for today's meeting. Of course, they would pay a great price. Jiang Quan, who came to seek revenge, would undoubtedly die. Chapter 1075. In the mountain deity temple near the Cloud Villa, a rustic old man with a crooked back was busy in the kitchen. He was wearing an apron, and the sound of chopping on the chopping board was like the sound of clothes being pounded. The mountain deity, who never received guests, brought such an old guy back to the mountain for the first time. She even leaned against the door and looked at the old man in the room with affection. This made the female ghost maids of all ages in the temple stand far away and look at each other. Could it be that the mountain deity found her father? Zhu Lian did not turn his head. He skillfully put stacks of seasonings into small delicate bowls made by the factory of his homeland. He smiled and said, "Miss Xie, actually I don't have the sorrow of leaving my hometown, the pain of the fall of my country, the sorrow of the thorns, or the feeling of being separated. I have no regrets when I was alive, so why should I care about what happens after I die? Therefore, if you are worried about me, I will think that you are forcing yourself to be worried for a new poem. It is not worthwhile. Really, don't frown. It is not good for others to see." Xie Dao just stared at him in a daze. She did not say anything. Chapter 1076. A generation of mountains and rivers was born with a generation of characters. The mountains and rivers were picturesque and the characters were even more outstanding. Not to mention Xie Go, even the Minister of Justice Changming could not understand why Chen Pinggan was so nervous. Only his disciple and Guozhujiu could see it. During the meeting at the inverted Xian Mountains Spring Banner House, Chen Pinggan showed up for the first time as the new hidden official of the Great Wall of Sword Qi. He was not nervous at all. No matter how small the blessed land was, it was still a complete world with an orderly cycle of Tao. The sun and moon rose and fell, the grass and trees withered, the flowers bloomed and withered, the immortals and mortals changed, and the dim and bright flowed. Moreover, Chen Pinggan regarded the blessed land of lotus roots as his hometown, Lizhu Cave. Chapter 1077. Chen Pinggan brought Xiaomi to the house. The doors to the courtyard and the house were all open. In the guest hall, other than Yu Xian, senior marshal brother Zhun Qian and Bai were also present. Pei Qian was sitting upright, and there was also a little boy in green who looked down, not knowing what he was doing sitting there. "Old immortal you don't seem to be a wine lover. Moreover, the old man's cultivation level is so high, and he's so old." If he really toasted him at the table, Chen Lingjun was afraid that his hands would tremble and he wouldn't be able to hold the wine bowl steadily. Chen Pinggan, who was wearing a green Daoist robe and carrying a sword on his back, stepped over the threshold and bowed to the old Daoist master. "Junior greets Daoist master Yu." The old Daoist master stretched out his hand and gestured twice, smiling. "As a guest, I'm not being courteous. I'm just strolling around in my own house. As the host, fellow Daoist Chen, there's no need to be courteous." It was Chen Pinggan's first time meeting this world's most proud person. He bowed again. "Greetings, Mr. Bai, senior marshal brother Zhun Qian." Bai also nodded in greeting. Chapter 1078. Chen Pinggan left Yu Xian behind and left the mountain peak alone. He went to the bamboo house to change into his daily mountain attire and put on his cotton robe and cloth shoes again. It was green and green. Xie Go sat at the table by the cliff and said that he did not disappoint the mission and passed the message to that flashy Liu. Chen Pinggan nodded with a smile and asked him to tell Guozhujiu to have dinner together. In the past, as long as Guozhujiu stayed in the mountain to eat, Chen Pinggan would personally cook a few dishes that were his specialty. Not to mention Zhu Lian's culinary skills, they were very appetizing and did not go against his heart. Yu Xian was quite helpless. Daoist Chen's self-evaluation of not enough aptitude, Yu's ideas to make up for it made the old Daoist master speechless again. Why did Daoist friend scold him again? "Old scholar, you have to discipline him." Peach Talisman Mountain was unique among the 5 sects. Yu Xian remembered that he had a few immortal seedlings with good aptitude. They could climb the mountain easily. It was just that they were all too arrogant. He remembered that there was a young Jindan sword cultivator who was conferred the title of Daoist Sword Immortal at the Jingwei Temple. He was so arrogant when he saw him, the founder, and even complained that the founder was not a sword immortal. It was a fly in the ointment. Should he let them come to Luopa Mountain to gain experience? Don't you all think that you are very smart and that breaking through realms is as common as eating and drinking? I'll let you all see Chen Pinggan, who broke his jindan again and again and only returned to his nascent soul after 3 rounds of seclusion. I don't know if Daoist friend Chen has the leisure to teach them. Is he willing to teach them? It's unlikely. Chapter 1079. During this trip to Jise Peak, the old scholar came and left in a hurry, but he did not tell Chen Pinggan the reason. Chen Pinggan believed that his last disciple had already guessed it. This was also because the pan-water discussion of the way by the supreme sage teacher had talked about the knowledge related to the matter of asking the heavens. The old Xiozai was better at this. No matter whether it was the Tao seeking with the old teacher in the imitation white jade capital or the Tao preaching to Yu Xian in outer space, it all showed the old Xiozai's knowledge. This was why he was able to ask for leave from the Sage of Rites and take an hour to go to Luorpa Mountain. In the end, the old elementary scholar, who wanted to stay for a few more days, could only apologize to the children with a bitter face. He then pulled Chen Pinggan along for a short walk on the mountain road. The old man quickly asked a few important questions. Are you confident that you can return to Pudding after your seclusion? There was one good thing about Chen Pinggan, and it was that he would not deliberately tell white lies that would reassure others. I have a certain amount of confidence. You don't have to worry about this. Taking a step back, I have my own methods. Chapter 1080. Aquarius Continent, south of Great Blasphemy in the Qingxing Kingdom. A young man in straw sandals with a sword on his back was chewing on a piping hot pancake. He stood at the edge of the crowded stage and did not look at the young lady with heavy makeup but only at Qian Mo. The night was dark. In the capital of Jade Xian Kingdom, there was a mansion that was often haunted but not haunted. A Daoist priest finally had some free time after a busy day. He lit the lamp and read some miscellaneous books. There were 2 dishes on the table. This Daoist priest, Wu Di, who had a reputation for setting up a fortune-telling stall, was flipping through a book called Heavenly Works Opening Things. He read as he read. However, he picked the content that he liked and read the 2 chapters, Pottery Spirit and Hammer Forging twice. During this time, the Daoist priest started reading from the preface, full of energy, among all things. This book has nothing to do with the imperial examinations. Good, very well said. This is the real weight of a teacher's self-teaching. A woman's voice sounded faintly outside the window. It was truly frightening. Then why are you reading so enthusiastically? The Daoist priest boasted shamelessly and replied, this poor Daoist is a private Daoist priest. Why should I learn from those scholars who came to the capital to take the imperial examinations? Later on, the female ghost in a bright red dress who was standing by the window was the female official in the palace who was in charge of opening chests for the empress in the past. She was really tired of listening to the Daoist priest, so she stood on her tiptoes and stretched out her hand to knock on the window paper, asking the Daoist priest to change to the Tsuyao that was so enjoyable just by listening to it. The money-grubbing Daoist priest stretched out his hand to press down on the book and said that she had to pay. The female ghost was unwilling to waste her money and her feet left the ground and floated away. The evening drum in the temple was long and drawn out. The middle-aged scholar who was copying the sutras stopped writing and shook his wrist. He turned his head to look outside the door. The old cobwebs under the eaves were broken and fluttering. For some reason, he remembered the content written in a scholar's notebook. The Buddhist sutras said, "Stir with spirit, all have Buddha nature." In the Secretary province of a small country, a person who had been a gentleman on the beam for a long time to borrow books sat on a high-hanging beam. He lowered his head to look at an official who had just finished his duty. He put on a thick cotton coat over his official robe and came here to pick a few books that he liked. He looked left and right, but there was no one around. In fact, there was only Shu Li who helped to keep watch at the door. If there was any movement, Shu Li, who had received the money, would alert the official in the room by coughing. After the official put the 3 books into his pocket, he seemed to feel that it was inappropriate. The cotton robe did not look good enough and might give him away. He could only reluctantly put one of the ancient books back to its original position and tiptoed out of the library that had been in disrepair for a long time. When Shu Li locked the door, the civil official looked back and thought that one day when he became a high-ranking official, he would definitely ask the Ministry of Revenue to allocate funds to rebuild this place. He ordered the guards to be loyal to their duties and not let these precious books be taken home year after year by the thieves. Chapter 1081. Deer cries, eating the apple of the wild. My heart is in the green collar. If one thinks about the innocence, how similar is love between men and women to seeking Tao in the mountains. Sir, this rain is a little different. Ningji caught up with Chen Pingan. He didn't bring an umbrella when he went out. His senior apprentice brother Zhao Shuxia was usually the first to go to the Source Village school and prepare breakfast there. He didn't expect it to rain halfway. Fortunately, he didn't run for long before he met the sir who seemed to have predicted the heavy rain before he went out. He was really a learned man. Chapter 1082. There were hundreds of flowers in the mountains, and white clothes made wine. Chen Pingan, who appeared later, picked up the bowl of wine on the table and took the initiative. He stood up and drank a mouthful, then smiled and looked at the female cultivator from the wilderness whose mind and soul were imprisoned here. Unexpectedly, she was also someone who ate the rice of 100 families and stole the fist of 100 families. He had really picked up a treasure. Addressing her as Fellow Daoist was very appropriate. He asked, Fellow Daoist, please tell us your name and tell us your wonderful story. Yes. The female cultivator couldn't hide anything, and she couldn't hide anything. The two men, one standing and one sitting, saw everything clearly. It was because there was a picture of her life experience on the top of the mountain. The past that she remembered deeply were the colorful pictures that looked like real people. The memory was blurred, and the memory and reality were mixed, so the picture presented was messy. It turned out that she was called Xu Jiaoqie. Her real name was Xiao Xing, and her Taoist name was Yu Ren. She was nicknamed Xiao Xiao by her master. Her real body was a kind of ancient bird that had never been recorded. It liked to fly across the world with fire in its mouth. Therefore, she majored in fire spells in the early days. She was wearing an emerald feather robe made of immortal molting after she was molted into a human shape. The preacher named the robe Big Appearance. The white-clothed inner devil gloated, "What a bird of prey." This unexpected disaster, which had been planned for many years, almost fell into Miss Xiao's hands. Yes. Chen Pingan, who had a jade hairpin on his head and a pair of golden eyes, smiled and said, a nascent soul stage warrior who can be loyal to the Luopa mountain after his memories are reconstructed will be given a robe of the level of a half-deity weapon. Together with the methods of the brow drawer and the tailor, he will also be able to learn the secret knowledge of the priestess in the desolate land. This is truly a profitable deal. Yes. The demon in white snorted, this kind of shady method can only be used to deal with chi trainers who are one level lower than her. It's not a good method. Yes. Chapter 1083. The heavy rain lasted for 3 consecutive days. After a day of rest, the mountains and rivers of the human world seemed to be drinking wine. Ji Yu Kan rested temporarily at the top of the mountain that used to be called Bai Yu but was now called Qiyun Mountain. She sent a flying sword message to Liu Kaicheng, who liked to show off. She had something to discuss with him. As soon as the flattered Liu Kaicheng received the letter, he hurriedly set off from the Immortal Inn in Chuju City without any delay. Before leaving, Pavilion Master Liu specially put on the pink Taoist robe again. As a martial uncle, he had to support his martial nephew so that he would not look shabby in front of outsiders and lose face for Ji Yu Kan. He didn't expect that in the place called Qiyun Mountain, there was only Ji Yu Kan and the maidservant from the Savage Land. At the edge of the cliff on the mountainside, Liu Kaicheng was a little confused. He descended from the clouds and didn't dare to complain. He just couldn't help but ask, Ji Yu Kan, are you bored here? Are you looking for your martial uncle for a drink? Ji Yu Kan said, someone asked to see you. Liu Kaicheng sneered, how arrogant. Asked to see me? Chapter 1084. Dali, Yuzhou, Vinism Temple. At dawn, the middle-aged scholar finished his vegetarian meal and cooked himself a big bowl of 8 treasure porridge. After eating the porridge, he sat down at the table and started reading. Another day passed and the moment he opened the book, the light shone through the window. The novice monk knocked on the window again to remind him, "Mr. Chen, the clouds have risen in the mountains. Do you want to take a look?" The scholar put down the book in his hand and smiled. "All right, wait a moment. I'll change my boots." Due to the heavy rain for 3 consecutive days, the mountains were especially cold in spring. The middle-aged scholar wore a coarse cotton coat for warmth and a pair of suede boots. He held a mountaineering staff in his hand. Chapter 1085. The whole world seemed to be waiting for an eagle to grow up. Finally, Ning Yaro became a pure sword cultivator of the 14th state. She had the highest hopes and expectations, but she didn't disappoint at all. Ning Yaro became a pure sword cultivator. Reaching the 14th state was like Cao Ci reaching the 11th state on the path of martial arts. Chapter 1086. Chen Pinggan stood where he was. An orphan from Clay Bottle Alley, who grew up eating the food of hundreds of families, finally stood here. He knew his own bitterness and hardships. The courtyard occupied a large area, which was worthy of being the former Prime Minister's residence. The shade of the trees was dense, the sun was high, and the ground was covered with fine golden light, like golden silk embroidery, on the seamless green brick floor. Although the bricks were laid, the floor did not bulge. Obviously, the craftsmanship of the craftsman was not bad. This was the study place of the head of the family, Ma Yang. It was a French style with 7 rooms and 8 deep rafters, which probably showed that he knew etiquette. The study room was so big that it made people click their tongues. It was piled with precious books that had not been flipped through since it was bought. There were several priceless ancient zithers, several jade mountains that were half the height of a person, and golden cruise ships. The high officials and dignitaries of the capital who had come here to drink tea and wine all said that it was elegant and melancholy. If they showed a little bit of dazzle, they could always make the master feel that they were genuine scholars. In fact, Ma Yang had always wanted to put green glazed tiles on the roof, like those Taoist temples, which looked beautiful. However, he was persuaded by his wife, who said that this kind of business was overstepping. His Majesty was not deaf and blind, so it was not worthwhile to put up this kind of extravagant display that would easily make people jealous. When the family ancestral hall was full of Jinsha plaques, then it was a real scholarly family. One day, when his eldest son came home and saw it, he would be happy. Ma Yang felt that it was reasonable, so a few years ago, he let his second son, Ma Yangshan, participate in the imperial examination. As expected, he was third in the imperial examination, which made him very proud. If Ma Che won first place again this year and became the Zhuangyuan, then the family would have the so-called generation of Zhongyuan atmosphere, right? A woman who lived in luxury, even if she was almost 70 years old, still looked like a woman in her 40s. She was indeed a woman who walked among a group of titled madams all year round. She was obviously calmer than the man beside her. She could still squeeze out a smile and pretend to be close to him. On Qin Zheng's fair wrist, she wore an emerald bracelet. She reached out and rubbed the corner of her eyes, which were full of crow's feet, as if she wanted to squeeze out some bitter tears. Chen Pinggan? Is he the son of Master Chen from Mud Bottle Alley? Chen Quan was one of the best porcelain masters in our hometown. He was still young, but he already had such excellent skills. Back then, in our Golden Goose Kill, if he didn't keep his skills to himself and bring out a group of good disciples, I really don't know what to do. He was the pillar of our Dragon Kill. I remember that at that time, the kill workers said that only Master Yarrow of Baoshi Kill dared to say that he was better than Chen Quan in making porcelain. Lord Lin of the Kill Supervisor's office had such high standards that he was willing to often eat and drink with Chen Quan. They got along very well, and many old kill masters were envious. Chen Quan was such a good person, how could he be gone? God is blind, and good people don't have good karma. It's just that you have suffered. Yes, if I remember correctly, back then, it was my mother-in-law who went to Mud Bottle Alley to help deliver a baby. Fortunately, both mother and son are safe. Now, you are so promising, even better than our Ku Xian. I believe that Chen Quan and Qin Zheng's intention was very obvious. She wanted to drag it out as long as she could. This bastard from Mud Bottle Alley who suddenly became rich by luck had rushed here too quickly. In front of the house, there was a group of useless people who were not worthy of being served dog meat. She actually let him walk to the back of the house just like that. Fortunately, Ma Yang had already sent out a few secret letters just now. Some were for the imperial tutor of the imperial court of Jade Shen country, and some were for the city god temple of the capital. Before this, the more people Chen Pingan killed, the more this guy who had not directly died in the hands of the Wasteland Demon Clan, the more he felt that he was in the wrong today. Chapter 1087. A hearty revenge was a drinking session where one would not return until one was drunk. Drinking by oneself, drinking slowly, it was enough to be happy alone. There was a person wearing a golden crown and a green gauze robe with purple clouds lingering around it. He held a glowing white jade ganoderma in his hand and a pair of white cloud shoes on his feet. He was about 30 years old, his appearance was flawless, and his body was clean. His face was not very handsome. He was like a young immortal in the fairy tales. His home was in the mountains and rivers, and the flowers and bamboo were dense. He was also like a daoist who lived in seclusion in the mountains. He cultivated and occasionally came to the human world. Chapter 1088. During the Qingming festival, when it was raining heavily, the women of the officials, wealthy clans, and the families of the middle class would mostly ride their carriages outside the city to pay respects to their ancestors. Although they were sweeping the tombs of their old friends, there was no mournful expression on their faces. Their clothes were beautiful, and each of them carried fine wine and delicacies. Along the way, they chatted noisily and drank to their heart's content. It was more like an excursion. It was no wonder that there were often scholars from other countries who used this as an excuse to ridicule the people of Yushuan Nation's capital. Pei Qian wanted to go to the Xiing Wang Temple in the capital, so there was some distance between the palace and Qintianjian. She bid farewell to Jiyu Kan and Jiyu Ling and secretly sneaked into the capital of Yushuan country. The security of a small country, whether it was on the mountain or at the foot of the mountain, was not considered strict in the face of a few martial artists. It was not an exaggeration to say that there were holes in all directions. However, Jiyu Kan brought Jiyu Ling to the city gate and handed over the pass. She chose to walk into the capital obediently. Jiyu Ling covered her mouth and laughed. Liu Xianyang is not worried about me going to Qintianjian. Are you not worried about me? Chapter 1089. I wish everyone a happy and peaceful new year. More tilde, the shadows of the trees danced, reflecting a jade-green color. Just now, Yu Shiwu and Ma Yangshan both had a dream. Yu Shiwu dreamt that he had turned into a butterfly and was stuck in a spider's web. He regretted breaking out of his cocoon. Ma Yangshan dreamt that he was drunk with a beautiful woman on a small boat at night. There was a lone crane crossing the river. When he woke up, he saw two Taoists with feathered robes fluttering in the wind. Ma Yangshan felt as though he had met a true immortal. Chapter 1090. Jiyu Kan had a good chat with the old Jindan who was the state preceptor. He didn't put on airs and was tactful, so they hit it off. They sat together on the threshold of the main hall and didn't have any hostile atmosphere. The palace maids brought in the food prepared by the imperial kitchen. They only dared to take a look at the young man in a scholarly robe from afar. Then, they walked quietly like cats in the night and came to the door of the main hall with their heads lowered. Huang Lai took the two food boxes. Jiyu Kan smiled and thanked them. The old man said that they didn't need to care about the food boxes and that he would deal with them. They then left quietly. The old man only ate a piece of cake and stopped. The reason was that he couldn't eat anything too sweet as it would stick to his teeth. Jiyu Kan munched on the delicacies from the palace in big mouthfuls. The old man grabbed a flea from his body and twisted it gently with 2 fingers. With a snap, it was as if every flea he pulled out from his body was a silent complaint. Huang Lai, who had been the imperial tutor of the Jade Shen nation for decades, said to himself that he felt that it was very interesting to touch a flea in front of the officials. Jiyu Kan nodded in agreement. It was very elegant. The old man then asked Ji Kan if she was Lord Liu of the Dragon Spring Sword Sect. Ji Kan smiled and shook her head, saying that she wasn't. The reason was that Lord Liu wasn't as easy to talk to as she was. Liu Xianyang had always done things without caring about the consequences. If it were him, the palace would have been in a mess. For example, Liu Xianyang would have directly blocked her and Xue Xiao's door. Huang Lai was even more uncertain about the identity of the young man in front of him. How could his tone be so casual when talking about Lord Liu? He couldn't be the one from the Cloud Mountain, could he? It was impossible. Could he be the great sword immortal Mi from the Sword Aura sect? I heard that this jade pudding sword cultivator of the hidden official lineage of the Summer Palace came to the vast world and is now in the immortal realm. Does it mean that the water and soil of the vast world is actually not much worse than the Great Wall of Sword Aura? Ji Kan seemed to have guessed the old man's thoughts, but she didn't rush to introduce herself. In the Aquarius continent, the Jade Xian nation was a small nation that was neither too high nor too low. Because it was one of the vassal states of the Dali dynasty, Huang Lai's title of imperial tutor was just an empty decoration. Although he was said to be the imperial tutor who was second only to one and above thousands, he was nothing more than a golden core who was hired by the Xue clan to keep up appearances. In the end, he was in a completely different situation compared to embroidered Kui Dong in the Dali dynasty's Song clan. It wasn't just because of the disparity between their realms, it was also because the imperial tutor Kui Dong was looking for trouble while Huang Lai was avoiding trouble. Of course, Huang Lai still admired that embroidered tiger from the bottom of his heart. The reason was simple. In the old man's opinion, without the Dali cavalry and the imperial tutor Kui Dong, the Aquarius continent, which was filled with hundreds of countries, was not just a country, but a person was worse than a ghost. After all, even a watchdog in a peaceful world lived more like a human than a person in a chaotic world. Huang Lai probably felt that it wasn't a good idea to just sit idly in front of each other, so he found a lame topic and asked tentatively, "Fellow Daoist, how did you get to know Mountain Lord Chen?" Ji Kan didn't answer his question. "When I was young and ignorant, I heard a certain person talk about a principle that seemed very empty at the time. He said that being a bookkeeper who only deals with numbers all day might not be very interesting, but at least you can find joy in the midst of hardship. It was as small as calculating the daily expenses of a small household. Ordinary expenses were as big as researching a mountain sect or even a country's tax records. You can discover a lot of hidden knowledge that is easily overlooked by others. As long as someone studies deeply and thoroughly enough, they can gradually see through the clouds and gradually see the spirit of a country, the trajectory of its rise and fall, and the traces of its policies. It's like having a real account book on the table without all the embellishments and facades. Every vein in the account book is a clear wheel track. When we are willing to pay the price and listen attentively, we can clearly hear the thunder of how history came to be and where it leads to." Huang Lai pondered for a moment. It was indeed a novel idea that he had never heard of before. The old man turned his head to look at the layers of palaces and sighed, "Of course the idea is very good. It's just that it's easy to say, but it's hard to do. Without great perseverance and skill, it's impossible to accomplish such a feat. The threshold for this matter is too high. Within a country, how many people can come into contact with these confidential files and casually flip through the account books of a country's Ministry of Revenue?" You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,